Okay, yeah. I know you keep getting messages. Right, here we go. Is that working? Let's see. Yes. Okay,
Yes.
Iris, over to you.
Hold on. The Torah section of Emor, Speak, begins with the special laws pertaining to the Kohanim priests, the Kohen Gadol, high priest, and the temple service. A Kohen may not become ritually impure through contact with a dead body, save on the occasion of the death of a close relative. A Kohen may not marry a divorcee or a woman with a promiscuous past. A Kohen Gadol can marry only a virgin. A Kohen with a physical deformity cannot serve in the holy temple, nor can a deformed animal be brought as an offering. A newborn calf, lamb, or kid must be left with its mother for 7 days before being eligible for an offering. One may not slaughter an animal and its offspring on the same day. The second part of Emor lists the annual callings of holiness, the festivals of the Jewish calendar, the weekly Shabbat, the beginning of the Passover offering on 14th of Nisan, the seventh-day Passover festival beginning on 15th Nisan, the beginning of the Emor offering from the first barley harvest on the second day of Passover, and the commencement on that day of the 49-day counting of the Emor, culminating in
A cliffhanger.
the festival of Shavuot on the 50th day, a remembrance of shofar blowing on 1st Tishri, a solemn fast day on 10th of Tishri, the Sukkot festival, during which we are to dwell in huts for 7 days and take the 4 kinds, beginning on 15th Tishrei, and the immediately following holiday of the 8th day of Sukkot, Shemini Atzeret. Next, the Torah discusses the lighting of the menorah in the temple and the showbread, lechem hapanim, placed weekly on the table there. Emor concludes with the incident of a man executed for blasphemy and the penalties for murder, death, and for injuring one's fellow or destroying his property, monetary compensation.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Emor talks about the festivals. Let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. There are actually 5 places in the Torah that we find details of the different, really Yom Tovim, essentially. There are 2 in the book of Shemos, which occur in the Parsha of Bo and Kitissa, which basically just refer to the pilgrim festivals. Let's have a look at those now. So this is the one from Bo. Who would like to read this? Any volunteers?
All right, I'll do it.
Go on.
3 times a year you shall hold a festival for me. You shall observe the feast of the unleavened bread, eating unleavened bread for 7 days, as I have commanded you, at the set time in the month of Aviv. For in it you went forth from Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty-handed. 16. And the feast of the harvest, of the first fruits of your work, of what you sow in the field, and the feast of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in the results of your work from the field. 17. 3 times a year all your males shall appear before the sovereign Hashem.
Right, so that's the 3 regalim, the 3 pilgrim festivals. No mention of the giving of the Torah or the right of Shavuot. It's the feast of the harvest, the first fruits. No mention of building a sukkah. It's the feast of the ingathering at the end of the year. So the agricultural dimension, and very brief, right? 4 lines for Pesach. It's not even 4 lines. It's 2 lines in Hebrew. So that's the first place that occurs in the Parsha of Bo. We then have it again in the Parsha of Kisisa. I'll just read that. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat matzah for 7 days. I've commanded you at the set time in the month of the Aviv. For in that month, the spring month, you went forth from Egypt. And of course, because it says Aviv, which is spring, this is where we get the whole concept of Pesach having to fall in the spring. Those who follow these things, Ramadan moves throughout the year, which is quite convenient if you have to miss work and things like that. But Pesach, of course, is always around the same time of year. So the whole point is the Muslims also use a lunar calendar, but theirs is completely lunar. It's pure lunar, and therefore their years are actually shorter. Our years are lengthened by the leap years in order to make sure the Pesach falls in the spring. But again, it's relatively brief. And the final one, source 3, again, is from Parshas Kisisa. That's continuation of the previous one. It says you should observe the Feast of Weeks. Okay, now it calls it Shavuot. The first fruits of the wheat harvest and the feast of ingathering at the turn of the year. 3 times a year, the male should appear before the Lord God of Israel. So that's the pilgrim festivals. Doesn't mention Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Yeah? Interestingly, the focus is on those festivals where you had to appear in the temple in Jerusalem. Because Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you didn't have to appear in the temple in Jerusalem. There were services that took place. There were Musaf offerings, and of course there was the whole service of the Kohen Gadol. It seems you weren't expected to make a pilgrimage. I mean, it could be, if you're going to Jerusalem for Sukkot, you say, I'll go 2 weeks earlier and be there for Rosh Hashanah as well. But they weren't specifically, so far, we're dealing with the pilgrim festivals, what we call the Regalim, the foot festivals, because people would make their way on foot, Shalosh Regalim, and they're mentioned relatively briefly. There are 3 other places in the Torah that we find the Yom Tovim. Now, all this duplication we know is not for nothing. It's not just laziness. It's, God forbid, it's because each one has a different focus and a different angle, which we're going to look at. So far, the focus seemed to be very much on appearing before God, obviously in Jerusalem, and the agricultural nature of these festivals also relates to that, bringing the first fruits and the harvest and so on. So far, 3 sources we've just looked at, which is from this week's Sedra and from Shemos, very much focus on the Regalim and on the sort of the geography, if you like, the geographical element, which is coming to Jerusalem and appearing in Jerusalem in a sacred space in the temple. So it's very much about a sacred place, right? Now, the other places it talks about, let's have a look. So I've summarized here. So our Sedra, sorry, the first 3 were not our Sedra, apologies. The first 3 were all in Shemos, sorry. 3 times in Shemos in separate places where it's very brief. Now in our Sedra, it goes into quite a lot of detail. That's the first time. It has the Regalim, it also has Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and it has the details of various observances. Emor includes things like the mitzvah of Arba Minim, I think it talks about building a sukkah, and so on. And it also talks about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It talks about the shofar, right? The sections we read on many Yom Tovim, besides for being from the end of Bamidbar, where it has the sacrifices, are often from Emor, which has all the details of all the festivals. The other place we read from is Ra'eh at the end of Devarim, which restates a lot of the festivals, and we're going to see that in a moment. But each have a different focus. So in our Sedra, if you look, it talks about the observances of the festivals and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and interestingly Shabbos as well. So remember, it talks about the observances. In Bamidbar, when we look in the Sedra of Pinchas, it talks about the actual sacrifices that were brought in the temple on the various Yom Tovim. And when it finally gets repeated in Devarim, at the end of Devarim, in Parshas Re'eh, it's very interesting. It's a complete different focus. What does Re'eh say? Who would like to read number 5?
I'll read it if you like.
Yep.
And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your son and your daughter and your maidservant and your servant and your maidservant and the Levite who is within your city and the stranger and the orphan and the widow who are among you in the place which the Lord your God will choose to establish his name therein.
Okay, so you've got your times, your holy times, Shabbos, Yom Tov, certain times of year. You've got your holy place, which is clearly Jerusalem. And you've got this concept in Devarim, which is really important, that Simcha comes about through a uniting of everyone and nobody being left out. This is really topical stuff, because nowadays everyone talks about inclusion, right? So you can't have your Simcha, you can't have your Yom Tov without, you need your time, which is, it has to be a festival or a Shabbos, right? We said before, a person says, I'll keep Shabbos every day. No, Shabbos is once a week. Yom Tov is certain days in the year. Other times you do have to work and make a living. You have a place, which is Jerusalem primarily. Now we'd say our shuls replace that, our places of gathering. And you have the people coming. You have the unity of the nation. These are all important aspects. So each one is different. So in our Sedra of Emor, it speaks about the observance of the holidays and what time they are. It speaks about their time, right? So it doesn't speak so much about Jerusalem or the temple or the offerings. It speaks about certain times of year when you have to do certain things. So it's the time element. In Bamidbar, in Pinchas, it speaks about the offerings that were brought. The offerings were brought in the temple. So this is a concept of, yes, of time, but also of space. That at certain times you have to do certain things in certain places. Right? So you have the limitations of time. That's Emor. That's talking about what mitzvahs you have to do when. You have the holy space, which is the sacrifices in the temple in Bamidbar. And Devarim, which is Moshe at the end of his life, telling us basically a manifesto for Jewish life. So he starts off by telling us that, you came out of Egypt and you were freed in order to have certain values, which includes looking after the widow and the stranger, and the values of justice and freedom and dignity. And whilst in Devarim also, you have to go to the place that God chooses, which is the temple in Jerusalem, and that is where God's unity is felt. You also have the unity of the people. So when Devarim speaks about Yom Tov, it again speaks about Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, because those are related to the place of Jerusalem, but it also speaks about inclusion. Okay, so we've got initially in Shemos, when it speaks about the Yom Tovs, it speaks in very general terms about a concept. You have certain times in the year when you do certain things. In Emor this week, it speaks in more detail about those times and the importance of them, more than the places, perhaps. In Bamidbar, it speaks about the place of Jerusalem, the temple, so the holy place, not just the time. Yes, there are times you need to bring this offering on Shabbat, and this offering on Rosh Chodesh, and this offering on Yom Tov, and this offering on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, but it's about the place where you're doing it. And in Devarim, we actually have both. We have an account of the Yom Tovim, primarily the Regalim. Why? Because the focus is on the place, but it's also another dimension which is added, which is this, that everyone has to be included. So you now have everything. You have time, you have space, and you have who the actual people are that are celebrating. And if you don't include those on the margins of society, then you don't have that unity.
Rabbi,
yeah.
Rabbi, if you shall rejoice before the Lord, you, your son, your daughter, your manservant, your maidservant, and the Levite, all have to go to Jerusalem on the 3 pilgrim foot festivals. Who looks after all the animals at home?
Who's minding the shop? Right,
Yes.
And also some of these journeys could take weeks. We know from Halacha that in Israel they would start asking for rain only on the 7th of Cheshvan. Why? Because that gave people 2 weeks to get home from the pilgrimage. So clearly not everyone went to Yerushalayim all the time. It wasn't practical. I don't know if people sort of had a notion that you'd go once in your lifetime, or once every 7 years, or once every 10 years, or clearly it wasn't sustainable that the entire nation would have gone. And they didn't, because we know that people had the concept of a shul did exist in temple times. Clearly shuls were not the focal point they are today, because you have the temple, but they clearly existed. I suppose an analogy would be how people celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut in the diaspora. Right? It's funny to celebrate Israel's Independence Day if you're not living in Israel. Right? Why wouldn't you go live in Israel? But not everyone does. So I suppose in a similar vein, the ideal way to celebrate the Yom Tovim was in Yerushalayim, but not everyone could. So people did do things at home. But I can't imagine everybody went. It wouldn't have been practical. Everything would have stopped for a month, 3 times a year. Maybe they did, but I don't think so.
Well, they couldn't really, because the animals would have died if they weren't looked after, wouldn't they?
Right. Well, unless they had non-Jewish servants, but
I suppose, yeah.
I don't think everyone went. So when it says that you, your sons and daughters, men and female servants, the Levites, the stranger, the orphan, the widow should all celebrate, I don't know if that means they all have to come to Jerusalem, or if it simply means that they should be included in Yom Tov. So, for example, that occurs in a passage which speaks about charity. So maybe it simply means you have to make sure people have their needs for Yom Tov.
It actually says you shall rejoice before the Lord.
Yes, it does. That's true. You're quite right.
And
that does seem to suggest
in the place which the Lord your God will choose.
You're quite right. That does suggest Jerusalem, actually, to be fair. Now we'll come along and we say that God says that you should make for me a dwelling place and I will dwell within each one of you, which means that there is the context of Shekhinah outside of the Mikdash as well. But you're right, it does seem to be suggesting that you should go to the base Mikdash. You're right, actually. Yes. I don't know the practicalities of it. How I'm interested to know historically how often everyone would actually travel. I mean, there's other things as well. There's dangers inherent in travel. We know they didn't do there's a reason we say prayers when we travel. They didn't do bris milah in the desert because it was too dangerous, the recovery when you're traveling. There's all kinds of dangers of can't travel with a newborn baby. A person can't travel if they're unwell. So it'd be interesting to know how many people in real terms actually went. I don't know the answer. We have to look into it. Anyway, in Emor, it's a bit strange because Emor, this week's Sedra, does talk about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, does talk about the mitzvahs of the Yom Tovim as well. And the rather strange thing is that it includes Shabbos as well. Now, including Shabbos in itself doesn't seem so strange, especially since it's here. The inclusion of Shabbos in Bamidbar is purely because of the sacrifices that were offered. If you had a section talking about going to Jerusalem 3 times a year, it wouldn't make sense to discuss Shabbos, because Shabbos is not a place. Shabbos is a time, right? Whereas to a large degree, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot are about space rather than time. But this week's Sedra does talk about the mitzvahs and the time as well, and the dates of the Yom Tovim. So it doesn't seem so funny to have Shabbos, right? People say we're learning about the Jewish festivals and points in time, and it includes Shabbos. What's strange is the way it's referred to. So let's have a look. Who would like to read? Who hasn't read yet?
I will. You go.
Okay.
Right.
And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, the Lord's appointed holy days that you shall designate as holy occasions. These are my appointed holy days. For 6 days work may be performed, but on the 7th day it is a complete rest day, a holy occasion. You shall not perform any work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord in all your dwelling places."
Okay. And then it starts again, and you'll know this phrase, right. These are the Lord's appointed holy days, holy occasions, which you shall designate at their appointed time. So, first of all, it's almost 2 separate paragraphs. But here it says, the appointed times of the Lord, which you should proclaim as sacred assemblies, that means places of gathering, are my appointed festivals. And then it says, 6 days you should work, and the 7th day is a day of assembly, Mikra Kodesh, rather than saying it's a moed, it's a time, right? Assembly you would assume you would associate with pilgrimage. Shabbos is not about a space, it's about a time. So it's a very strange phrase to say, these are the times of the Lord, fine, which you proclaim, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, Rosh and Yom Kippur, as sacred gatherings. That makes sense because of gathering in the temple, at least for the 3 foot festivals. These are my moadim, my appointed festivals. And then suddenly it says, 6 days you should work, the 7th day is a Sabbath of Sabbaths, which is also curious, a sacred assembly, a gathering in a place. That doesn't seem to really fit. Rashi puts it much more succinctly. Rashi says, who would like to read Rashi, source number 8?
I will.
Right.
What has Shabbat to do with the festivals? The festivals are annual occurrences. Shabbat is a weekly one. The festivals depend on the calendar fixed by the Beth Din. That is the meaning of the phrase, the sacred assemblies you are to proclaim at their appointed times.
Sorry, so my point was wrong. It was nothing to do with the place so much. It's just to do with the whole notion. As Rashi says, Shabbos happens every week no matter what. It doesn't depend on the Beth Din. It doesn't depend on the sun or the moon, right? In fact, it's a famous thing. What happens if you're in the desert or something and I don't know, you've got no idea what day it is, right? So the halacha is you count 7 days and the 7th is Shabbos. So Shabbos is something that comes from God and from creation. Every other Yom Tov comes from certain times. It comes from the calendar. It comes from the Beis Din. So actually, why would you throw them together? You say, well, Shabbos is a weekly point in time, and Yom Tov are, annual points in time. Yes, but they're completely different kind of concept. What connects them? So Rashi then tells us again. He has one answer for why we connect Shabbos and Yom Tov. Who would like to read that?
I'll read. Whoever desecrates the festivals, it is as if he had desecrated the Sabbath. and whoever observes the festivals, it is as if he had observed the Sabbath.
So Rashi says nothing to do with the concept of Shabbos. It's a simple fact of sort of, you like, halacha. If you break Yom Tov, it's as if you broke Shabbos, and if you keep Yom Tov, it's as if you kept Shabbos. What does Rashi mean by that? You might say, I'll keep Shabbos, it's God-given once a week, but Yom Tov, first of all, it's it's not divinely ordained. It's the calendar that in the old days would come from the Beis Din, and secondly, on Yom Tov you can carry things and you can cook. So Yom Tov's not as important as Shabbos. So that's what Rashi means. He says if you break Yom Tov, you may as well break Shabbos. So you might think that Yom Tov is not as important in some way. This is what is, and therefore if you observe Yom Tov, you're certainly ticking the box of keeping Shabbos. That's Rashi. It's a kind of technical point. So Shabbos is thrown in with Yom Tov to tell you that basically, although they're different in nature, that they have the same importance. Okay, fine, that's Rashi. Ramban, Nachmanides, says something completely different. This is what he says. I would like to read that, number 10. Anyone says?
I'll read
Do
again.
it if you like, if nobody wants.
And I'll read again.
Go on,
Okay.
Jeff.
Shabbat is stated before the festivals, just as is stated before Moses' instructions to the people to begin work on the construction of the sanctuary. To tell us that just as the command to build the sanctuary does not override Shabbat, so the command to celebrate the festivals does not override Shabbat. So although we may cook and carry on festivals, we may not do so if a festival falls on Shabbat.
Okay, so it's a technical thing. You may recall that the whole place where we learn the 39 forbidden malachas is the construction of the Mishkan. And how do we know that these are forbidden? Because right before the building of the Mishkan, we're given the mitzvah of Shabbos. And we're told that teaches that Shabbos supersedes the building of the Mishkan, these 39 principles. So Ramban says the same thing here. If you look at Emor, it talks about Shabbos and then it talks about Yom Tov. So from this, you see that Shabbos takes precedence over Yom Tov. So although you can cook on Yom Tov and you can carry on Yom Tov, you can't do so when Yom Tov falls on Shabbos. That's a technical point. Now, the Vilna Gaon has something much more philosophical to say. So let's see what he says. Okay, Iris, you want to read?
If nobody else wants to. Right. 6 days shall you work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of Sabbaths. Do not apply to the days of the week, but to the days of the year. There are 7 holy days specified in our Parsha, the first and the 7th day of Pesach, 1 day of Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the first day of Sukkot and Shemini Atzeret.
Right, so forget the diaspora, think Israel for a minute, right? You've got 2 days Pesach, 2 days Sukkot, Yom Tov, 1 day of Shavuos, that's 5, 1 day of Rosh Hashanah, that's 6, and 1 day of Yom Kippur, that's 7. Right, so he says, don't look at 7 days, look at 7 days, as in 7 holy days, 7 Yom Tov. I'm sure I've told the story for the Haggadah my parents had, where for Echad Miodea, they obviously felt that for the children present, it shouldn't say 9 of the months of childbirth, because that was far too much detail for a child to know at that stage, delicate age. So it said 9 of the Jewish festivals, and there was a little star. It said Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, Purim, Chanukah, Lag BaOmer, and Yom Ha'atzmaut, or something like that. It was like no one had ever come up with that before. But anyway, so here he's saying 7 days, 7 Yom Tovim, right? Yes, and carry on. Go on. On 6 of them.
On 6 of them, we are allowed to do some work, such as cooking and carrying. But on the 7th, Yom Kippur, we are not, because it is a Sabbath of Sabbaths, see verse 32. The Torah uses 2 different expressions for the prohibition of work on festivals in general and on the 7th day. On the festivals, what is forbidden is melechet avodah, burdensome or servile work, whereas on the 7th day, what is forbidden is melacha, any work, even if not burdensome. So Yom Kippur is to the year what Shabbat is to the week.
It's interesting. I never even thought of it like that, right? So on Shabbos we say lo saseh kol malacha atar mincha. You shouldn't do any malacha. Full stop. So people say, oh, but I enjoy painting. Okay, but it's a malacha as defined in the Torah. Whereas for Yom Tov, there's kol meleches avodah lo sasu, all types of servile work you shouldn't do. So in practical terms, there's not that much difference in Shabbos and Yom Tov, other than cooking and carrying. But essentially, it's a slightly different paradigm. Shabbos is rest for its own sake. Right? It's the seventh day because God rested from creating, so you don't do creative things. Yom Tov is rest from burdensome work of the rest of the year. So it's slightly more sort of mundane. So the Vilna Gaon says that actually, complete reframing here. Why does it talk about Shabbos and then talk about the Yom Tovim? That basically it's a pattern that repeats itself. You have 6 days of work and then the Shabbos day. You have 6 Yom Tovim, which are comparatively, obviously it's Yom Tov, but you can cook at least and eat and you can carry and prepare, but then you have Yom Kippur where you can't do any of those things. So Yom Kippur is like the Shabbos, and that's what it means when it says the Sabbath, and according to Vilna Gaon, that's why it's all lumped together here. They're not because they're the same, they're not. Shabbos is a time, Yom Tov is both time and space, particularly when it comes to coming to Jerusalem. It's a slightly different paradigm, but it's this idea of 7. It's you have this repeated pattern of 7. So you have 7 days of the week, 6 days of work, followed by the 7th. It's holy. We've said many times before. It says, Sheishes yamim tasem elacha, 6 days thou shalt labor, with Yom Hashvi, Shabbos Hashem, and the 7th day is a day of rest. So Shabbos works because it's part of a pattern of 7 days where you work for 6 days and then you need a rest on the 7th. Person would say, I love Shabbos, I'm going to keep Shabbos every day. We would say, no, that's not the purpose of life in this world. That's not what Hashem wants. Hashem wants you to work for 6 days. The implication being that for 6 days, you're going to do more mundane, everyday stuff. But 1 day a week is elevated. Even the Yom Tovim, 6 of them are relatively normal. 1 is elevated. Anyone think of another pattern of 7 that we're going through at the moment?
Shemitah year.
Right.
The
The
Omer.
Shemitah. The Omer is also 7. Yeah, 7 comes up, 7 weeks. And the Shemitah, right? We're in the year of Shemitah this year. So the 7th year, again, the idea of resting. So the one pattern we see always is this 7. 7 is, whenever the Torah speaks about Kedusha, interestingly, it uses 7 often. Kedusha appears 12 times in Vayikra in our Sedra, and often it's in connection with 7. 7 holy days in the calendar. There are 7 paragraphs in the chapter. The word 7 occurs 18 times. The word for Shabbat, 7th, right? The 7th day occurs 15 times. So it's a very popular idea. Now, there is an argument on what's going on in the Torah. We have the Exodus from Egypt. We have the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. And then we have this sudden digression. We have a significant, it's almost 40 chapters between the middle of Shemos and basically the middle of Vayikra, where suddenly, instead of talking about our national journey or the giving of the Torah, it's all about the building of the Mishkan and the sacrifices, right? Almost seems like a sidebar. And then we go back to traveling the desert and the spies and the Paraduma and all the kind of stories that took place in the desert and so on. But we've got this whole digression where we suddenly branch off into the minutiae of the building of the Mishkan, which was the forerunner to the temple, and all the services that took place within. So there is a school of thought that says that basically this is a very simple, this is a paradigm shift. That it's all very nice standing on top of the mountain, having that revelation, but the Jewish people need more than that. We need God in our lives. We need places where God exists. So therefore, the next thing comes after the Torah is the Mishkan, is the building of a physical place where God will be manifest. And we know it's not just the Mishkan. It says he's present in our lives. Right? Vasuli Mikdash, you shall make me a sanctuary, b'shachanti b'soicham. I will dwell within each and every one of them, not within it. Why? Because when we do our small bit in our homes, in our lives, we bring God into our lives. So you don't need a physical building, but ultimately it's very much about that. It's about the place where God dwells, which is curious. So it's not good enough to encounter God through terrifying plagues or through awesome special effects. You need to encounter God on a more human level. So as amazing and impressive as the Beis HaMikdash certainly was, with its architecture, it represents God in sort of in this world. right? The sea splitting, the mountains giving off smoke, the voice of God saying the commandments and people passing out from shock is all hijinks, but it's not a sustainable. It's great to get you all excited, but it's not sustainable. It's like saying, you take someone on a whirlwind, I don't know, Poland trip or a trip to Israel. It's interesting. A family member of mine went, it's not a criticism of Aish, it's just an observation, went on the Aish Fellowships program. I don't know if it's still running, but years ago, they get people who are non-religious to go, I think it's 4 weeks in Jerusalem. They basically bombard them with like amazing lectures and incredible experiences. And many people became more religious, or at least more committed to Judaism and Jewish identity. And this family member, they came home back to England. They said, you know what, it wore off because in Jerusalem we were surrounded by young Jewish people and like-minded people, and Shabbos and Yom Tov. But when you get back to reality, it's different. So when you're on the top of a mountain with smoke and fire and the booming voice of God, and the seas just split, and He's just killed all the firstborn in Egypt, it's easy to feel spiritual. It's much harder when you're back on the ground again to feel spiritual. And that's where the Mishkan and all the sacrifices come in, the elevation, the offering of our daily lives. So there is a suggestion that that's why, basically, the second half of Exodus, right, Shmos, and the first half of Vayikra, which is all about God's presence in this world, in the Mishkan and the temple, is so important. Now, it would also explain why the Yom Tovim, as they appear in this week's Sedra, don't talk about the social side like Devarim. They don't talk about the sacrifices like Bamidbar, but they talk about the spiritual side, the mitzvahs. They talk about them as a moed and as a mikra kodesh. Right? A moed usually is taken to mean an appointed time. Right? We just had that quote earlier. Eila modesh and mikra kodesh. These are the moedim, the mikra kodesh. A mikra kodesh means a calling out of holiness, a holy. What was the phrase it used previously? How was it translated? Let's see. A sacred assembly, a proclamation, a calling out of holiness. Let's see what that means. So, what's a moed? Anyone know what a moed is? We say good moed, moedim l'simcha. What is a moed? Chol ha-moed. So the usual answer people give is a moed is a time or a festival, right? Okay. Interestingly, actually, doesn't mean time. It means with all your resources. But anyway, what is a moed? So the place where Moshe used to, of course, receive people was called the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, right? So interestingly, a moed clearly doesn't just mean a time, although it's used to mean a time, the moadim. It actually means some kind of a meeting and encounter as well. Right, at the end of Yedid Nefesh, you say, Ma'herehov kiva moed, which means, hurry, my beloved one, for the kiva moed, right, the time has come. So actually, if you look at the context there, it's more alluding to some kind of a lover's tryst almost. Come, my beloved, we are going to have time together. If you actually look at the context and you did Nefesh, it's not just saying, oh, it's 3 o'clock now, time to meet up. It's saying it's time to be alone together. So a moed is more than just a time. It's a gathering and a meeting. It's an encounter. It's something spiritual. It is a connection. What does a mikra kodesh mean? Vayikra means to be called with love. So Mikra Kodesh isn't just a holy day, but again, it's a calling, it's a meeting. So these are very important ideas. When we talk about Yom Tov, yes, they're points in time, and yes, they involve a physical dimension, particularly in temple times, but there's a spiritual dimension as well, which is actually what Vayikra is talking about here. In Bamidbar, it's talking about the sacrifices. In Devarim, it's talking about the physical place of gathering together with the Shekhinah, the divine presence. In this week's Sedra, it's talking about something a bit more esoteric. It's talking about this, yes, it's a moed, it's a time, yes, it's a mikra kodesh, it's a holy gathering, but these are much more fluid words than just suggesting time and place. They suggest an encounter, they suggest an experience. And this is a very important principle. So we need holy times, yes, and we need holy places. Right? It's important to go to shul. Shul is a place where people gather. If you don't need a shul, you can daven at home. Okay, but it's a place of reverence. It's a place that's devoted for the service of God. It's a miniature temple. In an ideal world, we would all gather in our shuls. Yes, we would go to a place together. That's all important. And so is the social dimension. You have to include everyone. But there's a more sort of esoteric level as well, which is alluded to in this etc. It talks about a moed and a mikra kodesh, that it's not just a holy time, it's not just a holy place, but it's an encounter with God. So whether it's the weekly Shabbos, which follows the 6 days of working, or the festivals, which are scattered through the year, which mark history, or the 7 days, 7 weeks of the Omer, right, building up Shavuos, or the 6 years building up to the Shemitah. Again, a person might say, Shemitah is a great idea. I'm never going to touch the land. No, that doesn't work. You have to farm for 6 years. And then the 7th year is your Shemitah. So it's this idea that you do have islands in time. And the Yomim Tovim are islands in time and space of spirituality. So yes, they're primarily times. Yes, they're primarily often connected with Jerusalem, with space. But it's something more than that for us. It's something that is more esoteric, that basically touches us and gives us, the rest of the week, the rest of the year, we're concerned with everyday things. No matter how religious you may be, of course, you eat your kosher food, you dab 3 times a day. But at the end of the day, Shabbos and Yom Tov are far more spiritual times than a regular weekday. It's bound to be the case. And that's a very important idea. So the reason it's all thrown into this week's Seder of Shabbos and Yom Tov, and not just the Regalim, but Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur as well, is because it's all really one concept. If you just talk about the Regalim, that's talking about going to Jerusalem. It's a place of holiness. It's not a sort of paradigm. And if you're just talking about Shabbos, that's 1 day a week because it's model on God's creation. And if you just talk about Yom Tov as dates in the calendar, that's also times, islands in time. But actually, it's a mixture of all of them. It's time, it's space, and it's that serenity and that encounter as well that comes from Shabbos and Yom Tov, that spiritual dimension. In the words of Rabbi Sachs, we can't always be spiritual. God has given us a material world with which to engage on the 7th day of the week, and originally Yom Kippur, the 7th day in the year of the holy days. And of course, the Shemitah, God gives us time in which we feel the closeness of the Shekhinah. We're bathed in the radiance of his love. So to feel God's closeness, you need a special time. You sometimes need a special place. And that all comes together to give you basically a spiritual dimension to Shabbos and Yom Tov, which doesn't exist the rest of the week. Often we had a nice Friday night dinner for the Bat Mitzvah girls. It was really lovely. We had, I think, 4 or 5 families. It's a nice experience. We originally wanted the girls to stay over and experience Shabbos. They couldn't do it in the end. And a whole discussion about how we're going to manage their phones for them. That, what do you do when you have a Shabbaton? Do you make the kids lock their phones up? Or do you, on the one hand, you can't be too draconian. On the other hand, I'm sure many people probably can relate to this as well. Sometimes a person says, how can you keep Shabbos? It's very demanding. Or how can you not work on Shabbos? Or how can you not drive on Shabbos? Or how do you manage the long summer afternoons? And you'll say to somebody, it's hard to explain unless you've tried it. I say, well, we do Friday night dinner. Or we go to shul every Shabbos morning. Yes, but it's not the same as switching off for 25 hours. And how many people actually do that? Lots of people. It's great. People come to Shul Shabbos. People have Shabbos lunch. People do Friday night. So many Jews do Friday night. It's a beautiful cultural thing. But the experience of Shabbos or Yom Tov, someone was saying to me, more and more people now, Pesach, they do Seder, and then they don't even bother with the rest of Pesach. Now, aside from being a shame, that's a whole different experience from 8 days of Pesach. It's a completely different experience, right? Friday night dinner is great. It's a completely different experience from the whole Shabbos, that whole island in time. And that's what we need, because the rest of the week we don't have that. So I just think it's a shame that often people don't get to experience that, because even people who do Shabbos or do Yom Tov, it's always, people do it in a way that suits them, which is fine. They don't get the whole immersive experience. I think that's a shame. When communities go on like a Shabbaton in a hotel or something, and have a whole program with an amazing speaker and program for the kids. And in an ideal world, we do that for Shabbat UK. This year, it's all a bit kind of post-COVID. Maybe next year we can actually do that. Get people to stay for the afternoon and do activities for kids, and people see that you can actually enjoy Shabbos, and you don't have to miss out on things. But that's this idea. So this week's Sedra is one of the many places that discusses the Yom Tov and Shabbos, but it's kind of an interesting one because it brings it all together in a hybrid form. You need the time, you need the place, but you also need the whole kind of experience that goes with it. So there we go. Any questions or contributions, comments? I hope I remember to record. We'll find out in a minute. Okay.
It says recording. It says recording.
Oh, good. Okay. I used to have it set to automatically record, and then it just ends up filling up all your storage. But sometimes I forget. I once forgot to record a shiva, which was a real shame.
Yeah, I think some people get confused what you can do on Yom Tov. I get confused whether I
Right.
or
I also get confused. It's very confusing. We should probably, when we finish Hilchos Shabbos, perhaps we'll go on to Yom Tov. Because in theory, you can do various cooking and things, but then you can't do everything. So you're right. It would be good to.
on the oven, but you can. I don't know what they consider is cooking.
No, you can cook. You can't light a fire. So as long as your oven's already on, or if it's a gas, you can light your gas stove from your candle. So cooking itself is no problem. So what we do, right, on a Friday night, we set the oven to go off. It makes things a lot easier. A, it means you're not keeping the oven on the whole Shabbos. B, once the oven's off, you take the food out. There's no shilas involved with cooking and so on. On Yom Tov, we leave our oven on and we put food in. You can do that 100%. The only thing you can't do is light a fire. So you still can't strike a match to light your ring, but you can light it from an existing flame.
On Shabbos afternoon, how do you work that out?
Right. So I don't remember how much of the cooking on Shabbos is a huge field, which I'm useless at because I don't really cook at Flima's department. But the long and short of it is, you can't cook something that continues to cook. So you can't heat up a liquid on Shabbos, right? That's why your Shabbos the water's hot and it keeps boiling. Your cholent is already boiling hot before Shabbos. There is an exception. The exception is if something's completely dry and has no liquid, because you say liquid cooks, liquid's always going to cook more, right? Liquid evaporates. But a solid that you put in an oven, a challah or a kugel, if it's dry, right? Or salt beef, if it's dry, that you put in, it doesn't cook more. And if in fact it would burn if you cooked it too much. So the answer to the question of what you can cook on Shabbos day is really interesting. When I was in Israel, my aunt, very from, used to put barekas and the challah, and I think like maybe knishes on the hot plate Shabbos day to heat up. And everybody in Israel will do that. You want to do it with a liquid, they'll put something dry. This is a crucial point. It doesn't have moisture, liquid. So some kugels are very moist. It's a problem. But a dry kugel or a challah or some blintzes or barekas or something. Blintzes maybe have liquid. Barekas don't. On the platter, the hot plate to heat up or pop them in the oven. People generally in the UK don't seem to do that. The minhag seems to be that you only have hot food Shabbos day if it's like in a slow cooker. However, in theory, there's no reason you can't. Yeah.
I know lots of people that do that.
Okay.
Actually.
So there we go.
Yeah.
So I don't know what people do, but that would make sense. I remember my recollection of when I was a student and used to stay with different people for Shabbos was that people seem to do it less in the UK, but it's perfectly permitted as long as it's dry. So if you have a hot plate, and also we learned briefly, I think, there are other issues as well. The reason you need a blech or you need to tape over the controls so someone isn't tempted to turn it up or down or off. But in principle, if you have a suitable heat source that's protected from being changed on Shabbos, so the platters, the Israeli ones, only have one setting. You can't turn it up or down, right? They just keep things warm, the warming trays. So in theory, you can put something dry. What you can't do is put something liquid on, because we say the liquid cooks properly. But something dry that's... Yeah.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
if the liquid if a liquid thing can't be heated on Shabbos,
Yeah.
what about the slow cooker? Surely the liquid is being heated all the time.
So the answer is because it's already hot and fully cooked from before Shabbos, it can continue to cook. So you can do that with other things as well. You do that with your Shabbos urn, right? The hot water, once heated, stays hot. So the problem of cooking is a curious one. It's not clear whether is the problem of cooking in and of itself, or is it what you might do with the flame? Seems to be a bit of both. There's a prohibition against cooking on Shabbos. It doesn't say it does actually say you shouldn't. No, it doesn't say explicitly. We derive it from lighting of fires because in order to cook, you have to have a fire burning. So a lot of the things we were just learning about salting, a lot of things we can and can't do are possibly tied into what might appear as cooking and what might not, because we're concerned about flames, etc. So if you get around that, so the slow cooker gets around that because it's on anyway and it's hot and it just keeps boiling. The problem with liquids is that liquids, right? If you heat up if you have an oven on low and you put a challah in the oven, or you put some kugel, dry kugel in the oven, or some barekas, they're going to get warm. They're not going to cook more. They're going to get warmed up, right? If you put soup in, it's going to actually start to boil, and that will ultimately cook. Some of it will boil away. So liquids generally cook, solids don't. So the only reason your cholent is okay is because it was on from before Shabbos and it stayed hot. Same with your Shabbos kettle. So the only situation where you're allowed to put something on in the first place on Shabbos itself is something dry on a suitable heat source that can't be altered, basically. So a hot plate, in theory, you can leave your oven on. You should probably tape over the controls so that no one will come switch it off for any reason. And you can put dry things in. So you can put your challah in to warm up in theory. So as I said, if people do it, I'm not disputing that. I got the impression years ago it was more of an Israeli thing. There's no reason it should be. It's perfectly halachically permitted. The only thing is possibly it's like many things that you'll have ignorance. I know of a person who assumed that because they knew you could put your barekas in the oven, they assumed you could put any food to cook, and of course you can't. Something's liquid, you can't. They also assumed that they could have a non-Jew come and switch on the oven for them Shabbos day, which is also not so clear. So people make assumptions based on things. Education, we have to learn things. So yeah, that's the answer to this question is correct. Even something liquid, it only helps because it's been heated and kept hot from before Shabbos. So that applies to your Shabbos kettle, your cholent, etc. Some people, I think Sally does it. I don't know if any of you do it, to make salt beef by keeping it in water over Shabbos, basically. Does that sound right? Hot water or something like that. I know they do that in Baka Sol. They put it in a slow cooker, I think, and it cooked slowly through Shabbos. I'm not sure exactly. Sorry, you were going to say?
No, I was just thinking about having the hot plate on the whole time, especially in the summer, with electricity and everything. It's all very well you could turn the oven off on Friday, but if you want to heat up something on Saturday, the blade's got to be on from before Shabbos on Friday, right the way till maybe 10 or 11 o'clock on Saturday evening. And that's what I was trying to work around.
Aren't you
Right.
on a time switch? Can you put the blech on the time switch?
Put the time switch to come back on again to heat
So
up.
I think in theory you can, again, if you were heating something dry.
Yeah.
You have to be careful what you heat.
They won't let me do that.
Right. It's not so straightforward, but look, cost. Look, I mean, gotta be honest. Cost is an issue. If you leave your oven on for 3 days over a 3-day Yom Tov, these days probably costs you about £15. It's not negligible. These are considerations. There's an interesting discussion about gas, right? If you turn the gas up once it's on, are you just feeding more fuel to the flame, or is it the equivalent of lighting a new flame? So most people say no, you're just increasing the fuel. So many people will do that. They'll light a gas stove from a Yotze candle, and if necessary, they'll turn the gas up. What about turning the gas down? Not off, let's say. Why not?
Because you're decreasing the heat.
Well, let me put a question to you, which I was discussing on recently. The thinking would be you can't switch the gas off because you're not allowed to extinguish a flame on Shabbos or Yom Tov. But what about turning it down? So I believe that there is a view, which is possibly not widely held, that you could actually turn it down. For the same reason you can turn it up, that you're not actually extinguishing or lighting a flame, you're just increasing the amount of fuel, which is not the same thing. But interestingly, I do believe, and please don't quote me on this, that somebody said there is a quote from Moshe Feinstein somewhere where he did discuss the permissibility of turning the gas down for the sake of saving Yiddish geld. Now, people might laugh,
wow.
but
Wow.
the whole reason you bring your chicken to the rob instead of just throwing it in the bin when there's a shiloh is because we don't want to waste things unnecessarily, right? Wastage is a concern in halacha. So that doesn't mean you can break Shabbos, but if something's permitted and would also allow a person to actually save some money through not having to leave all their, I mean, time switches are not universally, they're contentious as well, by the way. Yeah. Because how is a time switch any different from asking a non-Jewish servant to do malacha for you also? And there's a whole thing about that. And not everyone can use time switches for everything or only for certain things and not in the spirit of Shabbos, etc. So light maybe, because light is really important and light is for shalom bayis and peace, you don't trip over. So the whole area is not straightforward. People think you just put a time switch on everything. It's not true. Now you can't do it because TVs are more complex. But back in the day, you could put a time switch on your TV to come on. No, it doesn't work that way. It's a complex area. Yeah. Right. Okay. I make it nearly 11 o'clock. So I'm gonna wish everyone a good week. Nice to be back. We haven't at any point discussed the idea of having this share in real life. Whilst most things are going back to real life, I recognize that we have a geographically diverse cohort. I'm quite happy. We could do it hybrid. It's not the same, to be honest. We've done it with a Tanakh share, but it's not the same when some people are on Zoom and some people are not. So unless anyone objects, I'm quite happy to continue on Zoom for the time being.
Yeah.
Don't think it's the end of the world.
Yeah.
It's easier
Right.
if we're at home and,
It is easier. It is easier, to be honest.
Yeah.
I
Takes
would.
minutes to get to shul, 20 minutes, so.
Right. I also know that most of you go out to other things, so it's not like you're never leaving the house. In which case, I would definitely say I would be concerned to be encouraging people not to leave the house. But I know everyone's busy. Okay, so we'll carry on as it is. It's easier for me. I don't have to tidy up the house. Right.
Okay. Thank you very
Easier
much.
for us. We don't have to get dressed.
Interesting. Okay.
Too much information, Iris. Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
thank you,
Have a
Rabbi.
good week.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Rabbi.
Yeah.